Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third and final of our webinar series on different topics having to do with working with kids and families around issues having to do with special needs inclusion and engagement. Today's topic is going to be on challenging conversations with parents and caregivers. So I'm glad to have you all here with us. What we'll do in a moment is I'm going to share my screen so that you can see kind of a PowerPoint. I'm just going to give you a little intro and then we're going to start with a little video. But to start, I'm going to share this. And, oh, that's not where you want to be. Okay, hopefully everybody should be sharing. Should be able to see this title thing that says Navigating Challenging Conversations. If you cannot, unmute yourself and let me know and we will problem solve. But this is what we're talking about today. So I always like to start with just a little overview of what we're going to cover. So we're going to start out with a little set induction, which is actually a couple of clips from the TV show Parenthood. Anybody out there watch that show? Yeah, I'm seeing some hands. Yeah, it's a wonderful show. It's off the air at this point, and the clip that I'm going to show you, or the clips, are actually from the pilot. But for those of you that don't know, one of the things that show focuses on is a child with Asperger's, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, which is now autism spectrum disorder level 1 without need for much support. So anyway, and so I'm going to show you a couple clips having to do with that character whose name is Max and his family and kind of what they go through. So that is that. We'll start out with that. Then we're going to do a little bit of talking about what parents or caregivers' emotional state might be when they come to you, especially if it's soon after a diagnosis. It can be a pretty challenging situation. So then we're going to talk a little about that. We're going to talk about what helps. And then at the end, I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a small mini training on something called emotion coaching. This is a little bit new to me, and I'm excited to share it with all of you. And I'm developing a larger training about it. So if you like what we get to, let me know, and we'll see about how I can kind of bring the full training. But for today, we're going to get just a little piece of it. It's not my own work. It's a woman named Adela France, who is a psychologist actually in Canada, originally in Canada. She now lives in, I think, Colorado. And it's a really valuable model for working with parents and actually working with kids too. But today we'll be talking about it in the context of caregivers. And then finally, hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for some Q&A. All right, so we are going to start out with our clips from Parenthood. So I'm going to switch my screen and hopefully everybody will be able to hear. Okay. All right, can everybody see Dax Shepard's lovely face? Okay, so I'm going to start the clip, and then again, what you're going to see in a minute, this is the end of the previous scene, and when it begins, you're going to see a scene of this boy Max in his classroom, and you should all be able to hear. If your volume is down, well, you shouldn't because you're listening to me talk. So here you go. Everybody here?
Save some paper for the rest of us. Freak. Boys! Max! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Calm down! Stop it! Stop it! Max! Calm down! He bit me! Back to work, everyone! He bit me! Max, what are you doing?
I can't believe that Max would do that.
It must have been taunted.
And we will deal with Amos as well, but for right now we want to focus on Max.
I think we're overanalyzing this. a little bit. Maybe if we didn't allow him to wear a pirate costume to school, he'd fit in a little bit
We all
better.
decided that we would monitor the pirate
everyone else
situation.
decided, and now he's getting picked on, which is exactly what I thought
think
would
what
happen.
we're trying to say here is that we're not sure that Sullivan Elementary is the right fit for Max.
I am. I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I think we should take Max to an educational therapist to have him tested to see whether or not she thinks Max can be successful.
Well, let's just cut to the chase. Are we getting expelled? You giving us the boot?
Adam. Are we?
That's great. Amber's out with Hattie and her friends.
Ooh, here's a 2-in-1 in Emeryville. Alex.
All right. I'm going to unshare the screen. So any initial reactions to those couple of clips? We're going to watch one more brief clip after this. But did that resonate with anybody? What did you notice or pick up on in that clip?
I was more focused on the teacher's reaction to the kids rather than the principal's relaying of information to.
In what way?
The way that she was just saying, stop, calm down, what's wrong with you, is, I feel like, the opposite of anything that we're supposed to do.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, didn't really take the time to figure out what was going on, just trying to stop the behavior, not figuring out what he was communicating with that behavior or what went on, not noticing maybe that he was just called a freak by somebody, right? But anything with the parents, especially the second half. If you're in those parents' shoes, how much you feel. Obviously, this is TV, time is compressed. It would be a longer process than that, but,
but a lot of times parents just don't want to, I mean, there are parents who are very involved, maybe on too much, but there are a lot of parents who are in denial. I mean, this is obviously a big example, like a kind of, overdone example, but of parents who are just kind of not dealing with what their child is going through, which is hard for, when you have to be the one to like bring this up and they're in denial over it, it's an issue.
Yeah, so I want you to hold on to that for a little while, because we're going to come back to that later. This thing about denial is a thing that I hear a lot. And I think, I see, Ashley, your hand is up, so I'll call in 1 second. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. I think we as educators often make that judgment, think that's what's going on. And most of the time, it's not, or it's not the entire story. So I just want to kind of like plug that for now, and we'll circle back to it, because I do almost every time I talk, give this talk in particular, right? Which is natural because we're parents, that comes up. Ashley, you had a hand. What did you want to say?
I was just going to say that it's just like the way that it was communicated as well. Of course, they're going to be in denial because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of sensitivity coming from like the director or principal either.
Yeah.
Pretty
cool. Go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I was kind of noticing, saying, I felt the same way that Ashley was saying that, he didn't, the way he approached it was kind of, I would be on the defensive too, the way, that he approached this situation. Yeah.
Definitely. Any other last thoughts before I show you? Harriet, you have a hand up. No, hold on. We got to unmute you. Go ahead. Start over.
Hello?
Hi, we hear you now.
You hear me? Okay.
You can lean back. Your microphone was just muted. Go ahead.
Okay. So I thought the early footage of this, and I don't know if the parents saw that, where he was trying, I'm not saying he used the right technique, but he kept trying to manipulate his scissors on the paper and he couldn't do the task.
Right, he was getting frustrated.
And so I'm wondering, did the parents ever see him trying to do a task like that and realize he may have a coordination problem? Or
That's an excellent question. Hold on to that as well. That will be relevant later too. Any other last questions before I show you clip part 2? Okay, so the second clip that I'm going to show happens a little bit later in time. It's just a scene with the 2 parents, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to just reshare, and it may show you the last couple seconds of the scene before, because I'm not sure I have it exactly at the right moment.
Oh.
But here we go.
You froze.
Hey.
Hi.
What's going on?
I heard from the educational therapist She said that she has some concerns about Max. She feels that Max has some learning differences.
Okay, listen, I've given this some thought. I want to contact the school, get Max a tutor to help him through this rough period.
Honey,
okay?
she wasn't just talking about, I
meeting.
understand that, but she
Okay,
wasn't
look,
just
I know that
talking about
biting thing is an
academics.
issue. I get that, and
Honey,
we'll deal with it.
She thinks that he may have Asperger's.
Asperger's? Like autism? Look, Max is not
High-functioning
autistic.
autism. A lot of people with
about
Asperger's
autism. Max is not
live very
autistic.
productive lives. Adam,
Christina, I've seen autistic kids. A Lessing's kid with a hand
she was
flapping.
saying
I mean,
that when
come
she was
on.
with him, she saw certain
He was
patterns.
having a very
I
bad
know that
day.
he was.
Okay, and those tests
I know
that
that
she
he
gave
was.
him were ridiculous.
Adam, that's
she didn't
not
connect
true.
with him at all. You know how important it is for him to feel
She
safe.
said that if we get him the right tools to
This is
learn,
what I said,
Adam,
a
she
tutor.
wasn't talking about it.
I'm not sending him
Honey,
to
there's
special
something
ed.
wrong with our baby. It's not just the academics, okay? It's not just the biting or the pirate costume or the fear of fire or the tantrums. It's everything. Please don't make me be alone with this. I don't want to.
Come here. All right?
Okay. Any responses to that? What did you notice? What's going on for the parents there?
So much internalized stigma. He was like, no, that's not my kid. He's not autistic. There's no way. Shame. Yeah.
Yep. Shame. What else?
A difficulty communicating. I mean, I don't know. Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it seems like parents had obviously a different. I mean, they have difficulties communicating between each other. They don't see their child the same way. Typically, the mom is more emotional about it. The dad tried to rationalize, and say, no, our kid is not this and that. I've seen kids flapping their hands and he's not doing it. They both have a different understanding of what it means and probably don't even match, the idea of what it means to have Asperger and what their child is. And it takes a lot of effort for the mom to convince the husband, well, no, our baby has problem. It is beyond the parrot costume and all that. So just coming down to the fact that there's something going on with their child and kind of dealing with it emotionally, and also mentally. What does it mean, that your child is now diagnosed, may have some issue. So it may not be totally out of range, like I'm sure parents are dealing with that. The parents see one thing, another see a different things, and it's very traumatic for parents, to kind of realize my child is not what we thought he would be. So I felt very compassionate for the parent, for the family, especially the mom.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, this is the very beginning, right? This is actually literally the pilot episode, the first episode. So they do, they do come together, and it doesn't stay like that. But we often see that, right, where there are different reactions between different parents, different caregivers, different people in the child's life, right? And you also see in there the father's tendency to flip right into problem solving, right? Which he did in the office a little bit too. Oh, if we just didn't let him use a pirate costume, or if we just have a meeting, or and when it's complicated, right? And you can see the pain that is happening, or the challenge. One note about, I mentioned it before, but just to make it explicit, they talk about Asperger's syndrome because this is from early 2000s, but that as a diagnosis does not exist anymore. We all still use it, people still use it colloquially, but technically it all got subsumed under autism spectrum disorder in 2015 with the new DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we use for diagnosis. So you will not hear Asperger's on a report anymore. But it's basically now you get autism spectrum disorder with a measure of severity and whether or not there is language or intellectual disability along with it. Okay, so just as that, but yeah, but people still use it all the time. Okay, any other responses to what was going on? Yeah.
Well, just also that a lot of times parents and people, I know my family would do it, they want to fix. Like, what's the fix? Like that, not understanding there's a process as opposed to like, what do we do to fix this? which is, kind of an indication of what is really happening or what they think is really happening.
Yeah. Right. Ashley, I think I saw your hand again.
I think it's like in the beginning we noticed that, it was asked like, did they see anything before that would give them any indicators that something was up? And then it's confirmed when he's like, oh, the pirate costume and the tantrums and this and that. It's like, okay, like he probably already had some sort of idea something was going on, but there's obviously that level of like denial or lack of understanding.
Or not understanding, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Anything else, Bob?
Oh no, I was going to say, like the lack of understanding, like not knowing what, and fear, like what's wrong with my child? How can I fix this? Like the dad just, like you said, jumped right into like, how, this, we'll get him a tutor. We'll do, instead of like, I don't know, stepping back and acknowledging. But I mean, that would probably be my first response too. I mean, you just find out this, and I'm imagining that's like being slapped in the face, very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Anything else? Okay, great, thank you. So we're gonna.
I think that Kara was raising her hand. I think.
Oh, sorry, I can't see everybody. Sorry.
Oh.
If you, because I can only see like 6 of you at a time. So certainly just speak out. If you don't need to be called on. Go ahead, Kara.
Okay. I think like I've actually seen that dynamic, and I think like for us, it's so important to understand that these situations are so layered, because I think sometimes we do tend to take the business approach, kind of like that principal was doing. So it's also understanding if parents seem stubborn or if they seem defensive, that it's so much more layered than even just them dealing with their child's diagnosis. It's their relationship. It's their, whatever maybe their upbringing was. So it really kind of just, it's a good reminder of really having empathy for the parents as well, as difficult as sometimes that might be, depending on how they kind of react to you or how they challenge you. So
that's great. And that's a perfect segue into what comes next. I'm going to go ahead and hop back. I'm going to share my screen again with the slideshow and make it so that I can see people. Okay. Again, I may not be able to see all of you at once, so if you have a comment, either throw it into the chat or just speak out, unmute yourself and talk, because I may miss it otherwise. Right, so that's a great segue into this next section, which is what are parents coping with, right? And I should say in this situation, I'm using parents, it could be any caregiver. Most often in our community, I think we see parents, but that's not always the case. But whoever's responsible for the well-being of that child primarily has a lot going on that they're dealing with. So parents who've recently received a diagnosis, and this goes towards empathy, may be coping with grief, right? That's one thing. It sounds kind of funny to say grief because your child is alive, right? Your child is not dead. But for some parents, there is a real feeling of grieving for the child you thought you were going to have. Right? You imagine your life a certain way, your child's life a certain way, and then you learn that actually maybe that's not the way it's going to be. And a lot of parents have strong reactions to that. Not all of them, but some do. So there may be some grief happening. To bear that in mind. Fear about the future, that's a big one, right? Fear about what's going to happen to my child. How are they going to do in life? What are they going to do when I'm gone? And this happens like right away. It can happen almost immediately when you find out something is different about your child. So that may kick in, right? Some fear about what lies ahead immediately and also in more long-term. Finances, this is a huge one. We live in the Bay Area, which is already very expensive, very hard to have a life unless you make really excellent income. We have a lot of 2-parent working families, especially in certain parts of the Bay. And then you add this on top of it, right? So, pretty much every parent I know struggles at least a little bit financially. And then, you have to remember that when you get the diagnosis, that may mean additional therapy. That may mean more other kinds of appointments. It might mean speech. It might mean occupational therapy. It might mean applied behavioral analysis, which can get covered by insurance, but there's always other costs, right? It might mean, as many of you who work in the schools know, that you are going to be responsible for getting an aide for your child if that's the determination, right? Which is expensive. Aides are $35, $40, $50 an hour. It varies, but all of that is very real for people. Marital challenges, right? We saw it a little bit in that microcosm, just in that little scene between the two of them. I think something like, I know I know in general, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. I think with autism especially, but really any kind of diagnosis, the rate of divorce jumps way up, like 75, 80%, right? Of when you get that ends up in divorce, because it can be really hard, especially when parents see things a different way, when parents have different ways of coping, when somebody really buys into it and someone thinks it's wrong, the diagnosis, right? It brings up a lot of stuff. Parenting is already hard, and melding the way that you're going to raise your child with somebody else who has a different maybe feeling than you is already hard. You add this to the scenario, it's even harder, right? And the stakes are even higher, if you can believe it, because being a parent, stakes are pretty high, no matter what, right? Here, it's like, this is your child's well-being writ large, right? So it can be really hard for people. A sense of powerlessness, right? There's nothing I can do. It's too big. What am I going to do? How are we going to fix it? We can't do anything. You have to be able to figure out the schools and the service system, which is really confusing and can make you feel really powerless, especially if you are somebody who is of a lower socioeconomic status or not a native English speaker. And you're put in the position where you have to navigate this intense bureaucracy of schools, certainly in the public school, even in the private school, to be able to talk to someone. Service system, when you're going to get services funded by the state. It's complicated and hard to understand and takes forever, right? And if you either don't have the time or don't have the language or don't have, the support to do it, that can be a source of real stress for people. Overwhelming amount of logistics and planning, right? Again, being a parent in the Bay, I have 2 kids myself. Logistics and planning, it's like almost everything my wife and I talk about day to day is logistics. Who's going to pick up who when? Can I go do this night? Can you go do this here? What if I go away this weekend? Who's going to, pick this thing up? Who's going to deposit the money for that teacher gift, right? It's like logistics. And my kids are typically developing for the most part. My younger daughter has sensory processing disorder, but it's different, right? You add to that medical appointments, therapy appointments, going to meet with teachers, interviewing potential aides, seeing if the aide is working out, getting an ABA agency to come, observing those sessions to make sure you like what they're doing, being in contact with the people who run it. It's just exponentially more hard, right? So there's a lot going on. So there's a lot. So, no wonder people are coming in feeling a little bit flustered, right? Or feeling hard, or are not able to totally, be completely present with what's going on, right? So what do parents need, right? Well, they need a lot of things. They need to feel seen, right? They need to feel like you see them. And I say you teachers, right? They need to feel like people in general see them, but they need to feel seen and acknowledged and noticed by the people, especially those who care for their children, right? They need to feel welcome. This is especially important within, a school that might be attached to a synagogue or a JCC where people find community, right? It's really hard to not feel welcome, especially in the Jewish community, if that's something that's important to you. And there's a lot of fears about if I get a lot of asks about, why don't parents tell us what's going on? People don't disclose what's happening with their kids. And a big piece of that is they're afraid of being told no, or they're afraid of being looked at differently, or that their child is going to get looked at or treated differently. And that is really hard when you just want to feel welcome. To not be judged, right? This is huge, right? I think about being on an airplane with a crying baby, right? Everyone gets so mad. I guarantee you, nobody on the plane feels worse about the crying baby than the parent of that crying baby, right? I've been that parent, right?
So
Nobody feels worse. What's that, Bob?
So have I.
Yeah, right? Nobody feels worse about it. Nobody is more horrified about it, right? And our go-to when we see that happening on a plane, or we see a kid being loud in services or running around like a crazy person when they're supposed to be in class, is something is wrong with that parent. What is wrong with them? Why can't they parent their child? They're a bad parent, right? This happens. This is the thing that people assume. And parents, and to feel not judged is critical for everybody, right? To not be looked at strangely or have their child looked at strangely, right? People forget, I have found, what it's like to be to have your basic humanity when you're confronted with disabilities, right? Or with behavior that you don't understand, right? You don't know what to make of it. You don't know how to approach. Should I not? People get really weird. And I know so many parents who, sitting in synagogue, for example, during, mourner's Kaddish or something, and their kid starts making noise and they get that look of death, right? I've heard stories, right? Where some congregant or some person in the community looks at them with just that death stare. And that, that's awful, and it makes you want to run away, right? So parents really need to not be looked at stranger themselves, or have their child looked at stranger. This is their child who they love, right? They need people to be normal around them, right? This goes back to what I just said about people forget what it's like to be a human. Like I've heard stories from a parent who had a kid who's now probably 17 or 18, but at the time where they were maybe more like 10 or 11, and they were a runner. They like would escape and run away from places, and they belonged to a congregation in San Francisco, where if you run out the front door, you are on a big major street, right? And the kid came tearing down the steps and running out the front door, and like nobody stepped up to stop. No one knew what to do, right? And the kid ended up running out the door, and like, thank God stopped before getting out into traffic. But I think about what would have happened if it was a 2-year-old, that like took off and was by the door. Like anybody would stop that, right? But because this kid was 10 or 12, right? Less likely, So not even did they not stop, but the parents were running after saying, please, somebody help, somebody stop him, right? And there was just this confusion, and then they didn't feel, supported, right? So that's one thing. And also parents don't want people to walk on eggshells around them either. That's our other tendency, right? Is to, well, I'm not going to mention anything or say anything that could be, offensive or judgy, so it's always a balance, right? Mostly they just want to be treated like normal people, right? And have friends and be looked at, as an equal by the people around them. They want to feel, and this is especially important for this group here today, like teachers know their child, right? Understand what's going on, are not writing the child off, and really have a deep understanding. Now, depending on how much you see that child, you may or may not have a really good understanding of what's going on with them, right? That's part of when you're talking to parents, what we're trying to get at. Those of you that teach in preschools, you see those kids all day, every day. You probably know them better than those of you who are religious school teachers and are seeing them once a week for a couple hours, right? But even within that religious school 2-hour per week block, there's still things you can do to get to know. And if you don't, to ask. And parents want that. They want to feel like teachers know who their kid is. So what helps with all of this? It's a lot of things. We're gonna go through these one at a time. By the way, I will also send you, I see your hand, Bob. I will also send you, this is a handout later today or tomorrow, so you don't have to write everything down. I'll send this to you. I should have said that at the outset. Bob, you wanted to say something?
Well, I would also add to that, that they don't feel alone, that, we're a team in this, that we're there to support them.
Yep.
And work with them, and, working with their aides and everything, learning what works best in situations and what doesn't work, and letting them know certain things that work best and don't work for us too, that we're a team in this.
Yep, exactly. And that's a lot of what this next piece is about, right? So here are all the things that help, right? So thank you, Bob, for being another excellent segue, right? So all these, what is that? 6 points, right? Reach out early, be specific. You can see it there in front of you. I don't have to read it to you. We're going to go through them each one at a time. These are all things that help when parents are coming in with all of what we talked about 5 minutes ago and everything that we talked about on the last slide, right? So reaching out early. Okay, this is critical, and I know this both as a professional and as a parent. You want to reach out to parents when it first becomes apparent there might be a problem or a challenge, not after it's gone on for a long time, right? Parents do not like to be blindsided. There are a lot of really good reasons for this. We had an experience years ago at our preschool where in July, after the entire year, when we were like practically getting ready for her to go into kindergarten, the teachers called us in and said, hey, by the way, we want to let you know that there's this thing that's been going on all year long where she's not been, allowing everyone, she's been controlling people, and we've been observing her, and there's been all this stuff happening. And my wife and I were like, why are you telling us this now? Like this has been happening all year long. Like we needed to know, right? Like for many reasons. Number one, because maybe we could have helped. Number two, we don't want our kid doing that. The school is our community too, right? If our kid in our preschool is not treating the other kids well, those are parents that we are around all the time, at every birthday party, every event. We're horrified to learn that maybe some of those kids have been being picked on or bullied. They weren't being picked on or bullied, but being kind of like steamrolled by our daughter, right? And they never came to us. And suddenly we're like, do people hate us? Like we had no idea this was going on. We're like, oh, so-and-so has been kind of cool to us recently. I wonder if that's why. We used to feel so friendly, and now maybe that's what's going on, right? Because we just didn't know, right? And it felt really bad. It felt like a missed opportunity, and it felt kind of, like you've been putting us, unbeknownst to us, you've been putting us in a really uncomfortable position all year long, and you've allowed our child to do this, right? Because you didn't talk to us about it, and we had no idea this was going on, right? And we don't want her doing that. That's the last thing we want, right? Parents don't want their kids, picking on other kids or controlling other kids. We all want the same thing, for our kids to be good, members of a community, right? So just remember, the school is the parents' community too. So reaching out early is like critical, right? Do not wait till the end. And again, if you have questions, yeah.
Perfect timing. Just a quick question about that. When you say early, if you can be a little bit more specific, because,
So sure, we did a session on this. The last one was kind of about how you move from like observation to action, and when is the time to call parents in, or when, and really it's not like the first time something happens, but it's when it's been happening enough so that you think there's a pattern and you think there might be something that's worth talking about, right? We all try to toe the line between not unnecessarily freaking parents out, right? And also wanting to be responsible reporters of what's going on, right? And help the kids. So it's a little bit of a little bit of a dance act, right? Because the first time it happens, it might be nothing. You have to remember that if something's going on though for a period of time, so it's more than just that day, that week, some external thing happening in that child's life where you think something deeper might be going on, or there's something that's now been of concern to you for like a little while, right? Not in July, when it's been happening, all year, but like, after like a few weeks, if it's not gone away, and you don't see any improvement, that might be a time. Does that answer your question? Great. So the next one is be specific, right? And that's being specific about what's going on. You want to know exactly what your behavioral concern is. So we talked about this kind of in depth on the last session. So we don't need to, for those of you that were here, we won't belabor it. But you really want to know exactly what's going on. You want to be really clear with yourselves so that you can be clear with parents, right? The same time that we were called in July, the teachers could not really tell us what behavior was they were objecting to. It was sort of like, oh, there's just this pattern of stuff happening. There's like a vibe and a feeling, and we're like, what are you talking about? What is our child doing, right? Because we need to know, right? So that we can understand what's happening and help you problem solve, right? And talk to the kid about it, right? Hey, I heard that you did so-and-so. I heard this is what's been going on in school. What's so you want to be really clear with yourselves. That might mean taking data and observing over a period of time, right? So that you really have zeroed in on what's happening. Noticing the patterns that this particular behavior always happens at this time during the day, during transitions, or after recess, or snack time, or when there's a lot happening in the classroom, like whatever it might be, right? It might mean checking in with your co-teacher if you have one, your supervisor, your director, your principal, your whatever, right? But really to get clear so you know what's going on. And then you want to communicate that concern clearly and directly, not in a judgy way, but just very clear and very direct. You want to have specific examples, more than one if possible, in mind, right? So that parents can get a sense for what's actually happening, right? And I think I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but always when we're doing this, we're never judging the child or labeling the child. Your kid is being aggressive, your kid is being violent. That's not the language that we use. It is describing the behavior, right? When things were getting crazy the other day, she was upset and she hit somebody, right? I could see on her face she was angry, she hit. Or she ran after, someone ignored her and she grabbed them, right? Not she is hurting other kids, not your kid is being X, Y, or Z, right? So you want to do that, sorry. Related to that is what we do with the tone when we're having these conversations with parents. Respectful is number one, right? A lot of this kind of goes without saying, and I know we all strive for it, but it's good to put it out there, right? You want to see the essential humanity of the child as well as the parent, no matter how frustrated or nervous you are, right? Everyone's nervous when it's time to talk to parents about like a serious situation. The parents are nervous. Preschool parents especially are like the most anxious people on the planet, right? Especially if it's their first child, because they don't, it's like that's their little baby who's going out in the world for the first time, right? You as teachers, I've heard from, maybe some of you aren't this way, but I've heard from so many educators, like it's really nerve-wracking having these conversations with parents, right? Because you also don't want to be judged, right? All of these things that I'm saying you need to do for parents, they also have to do for you. And I tell them that when I talk to them, right? You're nervous too. We're all human beings, right? And so everyone is nervous. So, and no matter how frustrated you are with the behavior or with whatever's going on with the parent or how nervous you are, you want to really focus on the essential humanity of that kid and of that parent. They're a person with feelings, just like you, right? You want to keep the tone non-alarmist, right? This goes to like not freaking people out, right? Parents, like I just said, are likely already nervous, right? Especially after they know you want to talk, right? As soon as you get that call, you're like, oh God, what's going on? What am I going to be told, right? So they're already nervous. So for example, it is not helpful to say, we are worried that your child has autism, right? That word especially will just send red flags flying, freak everybody out. You got to approach that real gradually and thoughtfully if you're going to drop autism, right? You as teachers should not ever do that anyway, right? But I know we have a couple directors on the line, and you know, just in general, it's not helpful to say we're worried that your child has this thing, right? What is helpful is saying something like, we've noticed some challenges that we'd like to get your input on, right? Which does two things. It's not freaking anybody out because you're not labeling the kid or saying there's a big problem, right? And also you're bringing the parents in, right? As you've been saying, just as a team, right? We've noticed some challenges and we'd like to get your input on this. That's helpful. Parents are going to be like, sure, what's going on? I'd love to be able to help with that, you know? So that's another thing in the tone. You want to keep it non-judgmental of either the parent or the child. So this goes to what I was saying before. We describe the behavior instead of labeling the child, right? That's the last thing we want to do. It puts everyone on the defensive, right? But describing the behavior, especially if you have data to back it up, right? They may not like it, but it's hard to be defensive, right? If you're just describing literally what you saw with your eyes, right? This happened. Not what I thought was going on for the kid. Here is what happened, right? You might not like it, but it's hard to be defensive if you saw it and wrote it down, right? So I've said this before, many of you here have probably heard me say it even during the series, is I'm a really big believer that there are no kids or bad kids. There are also no good parents or bad parents, right? Which we'll talk about later, but they're just kids, right? Kids behave in certain ways to get their needs, whether those needs are physical, social, psychological, sensory, or anything met, right? Some of those things that they do, some of the ways they behave to get those needs met are things that we want to encourage, that we like to see, that are successful, and some are less successful, right? Or things that we don't want to see, right? You want to connect with a friend, there are better ways to do it than by biting them, right? Or pushing them over, right? Go up and ask them to play, right? Or kissing them against their will, right? Like that, you might be doing that because you're trying to connect or let them know you care for them. That's a strategy. It's not a strategy that we want to encourage, right? We need to give other things. So, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to get your needs met for friendship, for whatever, right? That's true for parents also, and also for you, teachers, right? It's true for human beings. You want to keep the tone non-shaming. That's very closely related to non-judgmental, as you can imagine, especially knowing what people assume about parents when their kids are having challenging behaviors, right? We always want to assume good faith, competence, and caring on the part of both the parent and the child, right? And this will come back into play when we talk about emotion coaching in a little bit. Really, at the end of the day, we want to assume that everyone is doing the best they can, right? And if they're not meeting the mark for one reason or another, there are reasons for that, right? And that goes for you too, right? I'm sure not all of you are your best selves in the classroom every single day, every single minute, right? None of us are. We're people. We're in a bad mood. Some kid really makes us mad, right? We respond in a bad way because, you know, something pushed our buttons. It happens with me with my kids all the time, right? You know, but everyone's still doing the best they can, right? And we want to always assume that on everybody's part. This is where I start to take issue with that parents are in denial, you know, line of thinking, you know, or parents don't get it or parents don't care, right? That's pretty much never the case. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So seeing parents as partners, right? That we've already been talking about that a little bit. Kids do best, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right? When parents and schools work together. We're all on the same team here, right? Everyone wants that kid to do well. You do, the kid does, the parent does, right? So that when we're able to successfully work together, that works best. So a thing to ask is, how can we work together to make sure Isaac is successful at school, right? Let's partner on this. How can we do this? We both want him to do well. We both want her to be happy here. We both want them to enjoy their time, right? How can we work together to make sure that happens? How can what happens in school be reinforced and deepened at home and vice versa, right? I'm sure this is something you deal with all the time, not just around these challenging behaviors, but really in whatever you're trying to teach in the classroom, right? We really want parents to be able to reinforce that stuff at home. Parents probably want their lessons to be reinforced at school, right? So how can we reinforce each other and deepen each other, right? How can we do that? Now, at the same time, we have to keep our expectations realistic, right? And that goes on both sides, right? Both for you, expectations of the parents or caregivers, and for the caregivers on their expectations of you, right? Parents are tired, overtaxed, and stressed as it is, and they will not always be able to implement everything that you want them to. That is just a fact, right? As I said before, we live in the Bay Area. It's very expensive here. People work a lot. People have all kinds of external stressors and pressures, right? We're tired. We're anxious. We don't have enough time for ourselves, right? Until 9, 10 o'clock at night. And same for you, teachers. I could replace the word parents with teachers, tired, overtaxed, and stressed, and will not always be able to implement everything a parent wants them to, right? So we get into this trouble where teachers want parents to do stuff at home that doesn't match up with what the parents can do, and then they get mad and think the parents are not supporting them. At the same time, we have parents who think teachers should just take care of everything, and you can't, right? So and then they get mad at you, right? So this is how we get into kind of problems, right? Without realizing where each other comes from. I want to bear that in mind as we go through this. Seeing parents as experts, right? I always like to say, one of my teachers once told me, you as teachers are experts on child development in general and children in general. Parents are experts on their children, right? You are also in some way an expert on their children, but parents, the same and even more sometimes, right? They're with them all the time. Their kid leaves at the end of the day and they're with them, right? So, teachers are experts on children in general, parents are experts on their kids. And also you get to know some of your kids really well. Somebody wants to say something? No? Okay. So how do we do that? Well, so as somebody mentioned this before, I can't remember who it was, but ask if this behavior is seen in other settings. Maybe, it was Harriet about the cutting, right? About Max cutting out the paper. Yeah. Ask if this behavior is seen in other settings, whatever is of concern to you, right? Hey, we've noticed this thing happening at school. Does that ever happen at home or anywhere else? We've noticed that when, Sarah's mad, she expresses herself physically, right? Does that happen at home? What do you do, right? Does it only happen at school? Maybe so, right? Home and school, very different environments with very different challenges and very different expectations. So it's likely, it happens often that kids do stuff at school that they do not do at home. So parents may really, truly not have seen that behavior before, right? Similarly, they may do things at home that you never see at school. This happens with my kid. Her sensory processing disorder, it manifests itself a lot in when she's upset. It happened to me yesterday, like hitting, kicking, pinching, grabbing, yelling, throwing furniture when she, that emotional regulation piece, this happens, right? But at school, it never happens, right? It's never happened at school. So she doesn't do that at school. So it's different. Maybe it's because there she has a baseline level of stimulation and she gets her needs met in other ways, right? So that's a good question to ask. Does this happen at home, right? If it is something that you see elsewhere, what's the best way to help? What do you do, right? When this happens, what do you find to be the most helpful, right? How do you respond, right? And maybe there's something that you can, take from that and enact in school, right?
Can I ask a question about that, David?
Yes.
So oftentimes I've called parents and then the parents do turn to me as if I'm the expert and I'm kind of like, I don't know, I'm turning to you for help. But what if a parent tells you something, the way that they handle it at home, and you're just like, I strongly disagree with that, or that's not how I do it, or how I would do it? Is that a moment where you say, we're not going to do that here? Is that where you go for it? How do you?
I think that's an opportunity for a conversation, right? I think I wouldn't just say, no, we're not going to do that, right? And just shut it down. And sometimes when things are really kind of, out of line, and we'll talk a little bit more about what reasons for acting in ways that you disagree with, right? Usually it comes from a place of fear or helplessness or hopelessness or shame. And they're doing it because they don't know what else to do, or because they're afraid that if they do something different, it'll be even worse, right? Or this is how they get through the day, right? By putting their kid in front of the TV, or whatever it might be. So I think it's an opportunity to have a discussion. Okay, well, let's dig into what its function when you do that at home. What's the reason behind it? What does that do for you, right? And how can we maybe translate that into school? So we, that's not the way that we do things at Urban Adama, for example, but if we can dig down into what you think is helpful about it, right? Maybe we can figure out an Urban Adama version of that, So it's a starting point for a conversation, right? I would never say that you should go and do something that you're totally opposed to, or that doesn't go along with the philosophy of the school that you're a part of, right? That's not going to work out well. In the same way that you asking parents to do things that their lives will not allow them to do, them asking you to do things that your lives and your professional, knowledge and way of being will not allow you to do, is similarly ineffective. And on both sides ends up with one party feeling like the other person doesn't get them and is wrong and doesn't understand where they're coming from and is not worth talking to, right? Parents might feel like they don't understand my life at all. They don't know what's going on with me. Forget it. You might feel like that's crazy. Why would they do that? They're awful. We're not going to do that here. I'm just going to, go the other way and not involve them in the discussion anymore. Neither of those things are helpful, right? But I think it's an opportunity for a conversation and to dig into what are they getting out of whatever that thing is that you don't agree with, right? And what are some things that maybe you could do to get that same effect in the school setting? Does that make sense?
David?
Yeah.
Can I say something really fast?
Uh-huh.
I had that exact situation happen recently during conferences, and instead I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, here's what we do here at school. And when we both explained the outcomes for each place, what they were actually doing at home made a lot of sense because there's no other kids around. Mm-hmm. Like they had some behaviors that were coming up and they ignored it. And we were like, okay, well, this is what we do here. And it's quite the opposite. Mm-hmm. And we both came to the conclusion that, both were okay in the settings. Like each thing is going to vary based on the setting and who's there and what's going on. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's really good to step outside the box. And even if you don't necessarily agree with it initially, it's just a totally different environment. So
absolutely. Yes. And we're going to touch back on that again in a few minutes when we get to the emotion coaching part. All right. So any other questions about that? Okay. So part two, when X happens, what do you find to be most helpful? And when X happens, what does your child find to be most helpful? They might be the same things, they might be different, right? Maybe what's helpful for the parent because it gets the kid out of their hair or distracts them or whatever. Maybe that works for the child, maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe there's something else that works better for the child. So it's good to ask both of those questions because sometimes they're the same thing and sometimes they're not, right? So that'll give you more insight and more kind of nuance about how you might choose to respond in the classroom. Listen, right? This is key, right? You need to listen to people. Listen carefully to the parent. This is how you will know a lot of really important things. What they think might be going on with their child, right? Maybe they think nothing is going on. Maybe they think they're going to grow out of it. Maybe what you're telling them confirms the thing that they were suspicious of all along. And actually, yes, the fact that my kid wears a pirate costume every day is a little bit unusual and maybe something that we should think about, right? What do you think might be going on? What do they think? If you listen, then you'll know. You might agree with it. You might not agree with it, right? You don't have to agree to listen, right? You don't have to agree to validate either, which we'll talk about in a minute, right? But that's a good thing to know is what they think is happening. How do they think it would be best to proceed? Again, you might not agree with it, but it's really good to take the pulse of what they think is needed, right? They have a different perspective. They have reasons, as Ashley was just saying, for doing the things that they do or, responding the ways that they respond. What will and will not work for them in the home, that's something else that you'll know, right? If you're thinking of trying to get them to do some stuff at home and actually they work all day, every day, and they only see their kid between 6 and 7 o'clock at night, and that feels really awful for them, and they desperately wish they could see their kid more, but they can't, and they're trying to get dinner on the table and get their kid a bath and get their kid to bed and just suck up as much love and affection as possible in that time, they are maybe not going to be able to put on a strict, behavior management policy, right? It's not going to work for them. And they may not have the time, they may not have the inclination. And if you're suggesting things that are not going to work, as beautiful and brilliant as those suggestions might be, it will never happen, right? And not only will it never happen, but it will probably lead them to, like I said before, not trust you as much because you don't understand what their life is, right? And rightly or wrongly, that that might be how they feel. Not always, right? Some parents are really open, others are not, right? But that's how you know, right? Because you got to get a sense of, does this kid have a nanny that picks them up every day? Do they have 3 other siblings and there's 4 kids running around all the time, right? With 2 busy parents and whatever. So it's important to know those things. And how open they are to further assessment if recommended, right? We talked about that at the last webinar. People feel all kinds of different ways about diagnosis and about assessment. Some people really think it's great and helpful. Some people are really against it. A lot of parents in particular don't want to label their child. I think diagnoses are good for a couple of reasons: getting services and knowing what tools you might use, and really that's it. But some parents really are against that, right, and might therefore be against assessment, right? So that's a thing to know. Or they might be like, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do that right away, right? Which would help you. So either way, listening is how you'll know. Okay, any questions about that before we move on to emotion coaching? All right. So emotion coaching, has anybody ever heard of this before, or emotion-focused family therapy, or emotion-focused school support? Anybody? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. Okay, scrolling through everyone to see. So emotion coaching, so essentially what emotion coaching is a way of dealing with and helping parents or caregivers or kids really understand what's going on for them and come to a place, if their emotion is high, where they're more open to suggestion and to conversation, right? And there's a specific way, and there's a script that I can give you, that I'll give you here, that we'll practice a little bit together, that can help with that. Okay, so here's the brief description of it. It has 2 parts. There's 2 steps. Step 1 is validate. Step 2 is support. And the order is critical. Okay, so validating. And again, this is, you'll see her name down at the bottom. Adele LaFrance is the woman who came up with this. I'll give her her websites. One of them is emotionfocusedfamilytherapy.org. I'll put this in the chat box later too. And the other one is called mentalhealthfoundations.ca. And that will give you a lot of detail about the model. But what it boils down to is these 2 things: conveying understanding of their emotional experience and proving that it makes sense from their perspective, that what they're feeling makes sense on some level. And to do that, you generally need 3 pieces of evidence. So 3 because statements, right? I understand why you might feel like, I understand why you might feel like I don't care about your child, because all that I ever talk to you about are the challenges that we have with him, and because maybe you haven't seen me in action with him too much, and because you and I haven't interacted a whole lot for you to really trust me, right? So I can understand that, right? You're validating, right? And then support, right? And there's 2 kinds of support: emotional support and practical support. Emotional support is, I really understand that, I hear you, and I want to be able to give you what it is that you need in this moment, and let me tell you what I'm going to do to make sure that happens. And then practical support, about certainly around behaviors. What are some steps that we might try to alleviate this? But the order is really important. First we validate, then we support. Here's a little comic that Adele likes, right? The word validate, right? Many, many definitions of it. So we have to get to kind of a shared definition. Here, obviously, you did a great job, evenly spaced, nearly a perfect right angle, right? That's not the kind of validation he's asking for. He wants her to stamp his parking ticket, right? So what it is not is reassurance or problem solving or whatever your typical go-to might be. We have lots of them. The dad in the Parenthood clip, problem solving, right? Sometimes cheerleading. Oh no, it's going to be great. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. What else? What are things that you do when someone tells you some emotional challenge they're having? Anybody's go-to? Bob.
I kind of freeze.
What?
I kind of, I don't, a lot of times, are you talking like an adult coming to me with this?
Sure. Could be an adult child, doesn't matter.
A lot of times I don't know how to deal, I freeze, I guess you could say.
Okay, freezing. Freezing is a total go-to that people do. Yeah. We have been, and this is not your fault, right? We have been sort of like culturally conditioned to be a little bit uncomfortable with emotions, right? And feelings, especially, not to overgeneralize, but especially for people who identify as male, right? For men, like this is a thing for many years we've been taught, it's getting better in some areas, but we as a society are culturally conditioned to not really be that comfortable with emotions, right? And to sit with big feelings. It's hard for all of us, right? So freezing. What are other people's go-tos?
To give your experience of
okay, yeah.
Well, this happened to me and it was totally fine, or like this is how I fixed it.
Advice. That's another go-to. What else?
I tend to ask what they feel they need.
Okay, so putting it back on them. That's so on the one hand, that's great, but you're also jumping a little way to the support section, right? Without the validation part yet, right? I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Tell me what you need, right? In a way, that's kind of problem solving too, right? And yeah, I do the same thing. I do it with my kids, you know, like, hey, what's going on? What do you need right now? Right? Sometimes because like they're screaming and I can't handle it, right? Because it's hurting my ears, right? Or because I'm tired or whatever it might be. But yeah, that's
my way of asking them, like, yeah, I mean, how to support them. Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to give you feedback? Do you need to sit here? Like, I guess that's sort of my way of like asking them, you know, how can we make this comfortable for you? What can I give you?
So that is great, and that is the emotional and practical support section. That's step 2, right? So that's where we get to, but we got to validate first, which is the sitting with it and saying, I can understand why you're feeling that way, right? But yes, that's where we're going, definitely.
And I find that advice sometimes is a little hard because sometimes it's like, well, that's fine. But you know, if you use like personal examples, you have to be careful because it could trigger something else. And well, that's fine for you, but that's not mine.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So you have to be careful of where that goes.
Yeah, and people may not want the advice. People may first just want to be heard, right? They may just need you to listen, right? And not get advice, right? Depends on the context. Anything else?
Rephrasing what the parents say and to kind of establish a relationship first, but pretty much letting them know that you hear what they say and you have compassion on what they say. Validate, but in a way reassuring, you know, like rephrasing what they say, but in their context. And yeah, now I might feel kind of, I see what you mean, you know, at school that happened that way, but I see how at home it can be hard, you know, or you may see that way. But I would say kind of reassuring parent, you know, listening to parents, kind of reframing in a way that their words are heard.
Yeah.
Kind of repeating what you say here, reassurance.
Yeah, well, so reassurance, right, is it's not reassurance. When we say reassurance here, it's like, oh no, everything's going to be fine. It's okay, right? Like, don't worry, your kid's doing fine. They're going to be great. Like, no, they're not going to.
Oh, you mean that way, yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of reassurance that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. So here, for example, now here I talked briefly about culturally conditioned response to feelings, right? So here we go. A 6th grade student, and I know a lot of your preschool teachers, but imagine a 6th grade student says she doesn't want to give a presentation in front of the class, and you say, I can imagine why you wouldn't want to present, and then I want you to pause for a minute. Which 3-letter word are you now tempted to utter when you read that? Anybody? But you have to. But that's part of class. But your grade depends on it. But everyone else is doing it, right? Yeah, but, right? We often can say, I can understand why you don't want to do that, but here's all the reasons why actually that feeling is not valid or why it doesn't matter, right? So this is the thing about this emotion coaching. No buts. Not in the beginning, right? We all want to do it. Who else thought but? I'm sure all of you did. I certainly do. Right? Yeah. You know, so yeah, but, right? We all go there. So the core skill in this emotion coaching is really moving from but to because, right? I can understand why you might not want to do a presentation in front of the class because getting up in front of people is scary, because you may not feel like you've memorized the material, because because you are worried that everybody is going to think that you're stupid, right? And laugh at you, right? Right? I can understand that so we're changing it we're going to, I can understand that you might feel this way because here are 3 reasons, right? And 3 tends to be a really good number to make people feel heard. And as you were saying, Christine, like, so that their words are being heard, right? I can understand why you're feeling frustrated because X, because Y, because Z, right? And that's hard to do as teachers, right? Because sometimes it means, you know, validating something that's going on. You don't have to agree with it to validate it, you know, is the thing. But the first step of this is validating what's going on for the parent, right? I can understand why you might not trust me. Ooh.
Sorry, that's mine.
Okay. So that's where we're going. We're going from but to because. That doesn't mean but doesn't happen. But comes later, right? The but comes later when you're transitioning from validation to support. So the first step is this because, and then now here, let me reassure you. I can understand why you might not want to do that presentation because it's scary, because you think everyone is going to laugh at you, and because maybe you're worried you don't know the material well enough. However, I am happy to talk with you about it in advance and make sure that we're on the same page, and I'll be right there with you, and we can work on it together, right? And we can make a plan for this, and we will set the expectation that nobody laughs at anybody, right? So, but the validation has to come first, right? And there's a lot of there's a lot of things that you can validate, right? And again, validation does not mean agreement, right? You can validate something. That's why we say I can understand why you might feel or think or want, not, hey, I feel that way too, right? I can understand why it might feel that way to you, right? Doesn't mean I agree with it, right? I can understand why you might think that the best way to cope when your son hits somebody is to put him in his room for 20 minutes because it gives you a break, because it gets your other child out of danger, and because you worry that if you don't do that, you're going to hit your kid, or like whatever, you're going to lose your temper, right? I can understand why you might do all those things, right? Let's talk about other options though, right? So that's where we're going. So what are things you can validate and support? A lot of stuff. You can validate emotions and emotional states. You can validate attitudes. I can understand why you might feel this person doesn't like you. They haven't been really friendly to you. You didn't get invited to their birthday party, and they never pick you when it's time to, pick someone to go out to line up for snack first, right? That's talking to a kid, right? You can validate that. Urges, like I want to quit school, I don't want to be here, right? I can understand why you might not want to be here. It's hard to concentrate. We don't always teach you the way you like to be taught, and the day is really long. You're after a long day of school, and I understand that can be really hard, right? All of those things. Behaviors, disruptive behaviors, right? I can understand why you hit that kid, because he was mean to you and he said something rude about your family and you were angry, right? I can understand that, but let's do other things. How else can I support you, right? But it's because. So I can understand why, 3 becauses. And this works for parents too. I can understand why you're feeling this way. I can understand why you just said that to me, right? I can understand why you don't agree that you're, why you don't believe me that your child is, running out of the classroom every 5 minutes, because you've never seen it happen at home, and because usually they're pretty well behaved, and because when you call them back, they listen to you, right? Doesn't happen here. Yeah, Bob.
Well, I also want to state too that I'm sure we've all noticed that children act differently when their parents are around too. That's why a lot of times when a parent shows up, I won't announce to the child that they're there, because I noticed, for the parents too, because I know when my parents were in preschool, when my kids were in preschool, I used to love, being a fly on the wall and watching them and observing them and their natural, at school, because they, I've talked with a few parents, we've agreed that they act different at home sometimes than they do at school, or even vice versa, that, when their parents are there at school, they act differently even at school than they do when their parents aren't there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And lastly, silence. I can, a parent is not responding. I can understand why you don't know what to say right now, because you're worried you might say something that you regret, because maybe you feel like you don't know what to say, and because you're worried that if you say something negative about your child, it's going to reinforce my bad idea of who they are, right? Or whatever it might be, right? Because, right? Goes a long way. And there's reasons for that, right? So this is a graphic she uses, right? Think of emotion as an elevator, right? When we're really emotional, we're on the top floor, right? In order to get support and to access the support that's going to help, we need to be on the ground floor, because the top floor doesn't have it. It's on the ground floor. Up the top floor is just offices, right? Down on the ground floor is where the support is. So, you're up really high, really agitated, right? And then what validating does, those 3 becauses, is it brings the elevator further down and further down and further down. If we had more time, I would do an exercise where I would ask you to take a really defensive tight posture, and I would give you 3 becauses and let you notice how it feels in your body, right? We don't have time for it. Maybe another in-depth training about this, we will. But usually what happens is with each because, you relax a little bit, right? And relax, right? And the emotion, calms down, and then the elevator door can open, and there's room for support and redirection and learning, right? Because if you come in when the elevator is high, you're going to get defensiveness, you're going to get anger, you're going to get ignoring, you might get storming out. You're certainly not going to get collaboration, right? I mean, think about yourself when you're mad, right? I cannot when I'm really mad, I need to go take a break. When I'm mad at my kids, I go take a break and breathe, take deep breaths for 10 seconds and then come back. Because when I'm that high, I'm going to say or do something that I'm going to regret later. Right? It's just, that's the thing that happens. That's being a human being when we're really activated. So that the becauses brings everybody down. If you're giving logic and reassurance and redirection without validation, it's just it's banging your head against a wall. You're never going to get anywhere, right? It's just, you may see this in discussions with your partner, right? When they're upset and if you don't validate first and you're just oh, honey, it's going to be okay, and here's the reasons why, it's F you, that's not what I need from you right now. Leave me alone, right? Or whatever it might be, right? So without the validation, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay, so I've just told you that this happens to parents, right? It happens to you too. So we'll do a very short thing. No, I want you just to take a minute. We'll take a deep breath, and I'm going to tell you. Notice what happens in your body and how you kind of impulsively want to respond when you hear this next sentence that I'm about to say. Okay, so everybody, take a deep breath together. A parent approaches you and says, "I'm really disappointed in your teaching methods. You're not helping my child work to his potential." What happens? Anybody? What do you feel?
Right away, I think I would be defensive.
Mm-hmm. What
I'm
else?
hurt.
What? Hurt.
Yeah.
What else?
I'll ask, I'm curious to know.
No, what do you feel?
How
do you,
how I feel? I'm curious. I feel curious. I want
curious.
to know.
Wanting more information. Okay. What else?
Disrespected.
Disrespected.
Yeah.
Mad.
What?
Mad. I'd be mad.
Mad, yeah, right? All of these responses that you're describing are totally normal human responses. Many of them are culturally conditioned, finding out more information, right? There's things that we've been taught to do over time, right? Getting defensive, right? Because we feel attacked, right? We feel disrespected, we feel mad. What do you mean? I work with your kid all the time. I spent years learning how to be a teacher, and I bend over backwards for that child every single day. What do you mean my teaching methods I'm not helping your child with his potential? Get out of here, right? Like it's a real feeling, so that's the thing that happens, right? And it'll happen to parents too, right? When I say that to you, do you immediately feel like you are ready to have an actual discussion about what might work and not work for my child?
No,
not at all.
No, right? Yeah, definitely not, right? So that same thing happens to parents. So given all of that, here's a way for how we can conceptualize problematic parenting patterns. And notice I'm not saying problem parents, difficult parents. This workshop is not called How to Deal with Difficult Parents, right? It's having challenging conversations with parents and caregivers, right? So we'll call it problematic parenting patterns, right? Because there is no such thing as a parent who doesn't care or doesn't get it, right? This is a thing that it's just true. In the same way that you as teachers, you all care, you all get it. That's not what's happening when you get defensive, right? It's not because you don't understand. You're not mad because you think, maybe you do think they're wrong, but that's not all that's going on, right? Those kind of parenting patterns are when you're giving advice and people aren't doing it. As we said before, they're usually based on one of these 4 or 5 things: fear, shame or self-blame, right? I'm ashamed of this, or it's my fault that my child is this way. Helplessness, I don't know what else to do, right? Hopelessness, nothing is ever going to get better, or grief. Everything is awful, right? Like this, my child is going to be miserable for the rest of their lives, right? Right. That's where it usually comes from. So, there's always a foundation of sometimes misguided love, right? So there's always a foundation of love. Sometimes that love gets expressed in ways, they're not ideal, that are a little bit misguided, right? But that's always at the core of people. Don't do things because they want to be awful to their children. They do things because they're trying to help something get better, right? People come down hard on kids because they're worried that if they don't, their kid is going to run all over everybody and be a terrible person, never have a friend, and never get a job, and end up on the street, right? So they come down hard, right? Is that the best way to do things? Maybe not, but that's where it comes from, right? I'm worried about what this is going to mean for my child down the road, right? In times of stress, especially, it can lead to inflexible and reactive parenting behaviors, right? Lashing out, getting really mad, lashing out against you, right? Punishing the child, right? Because you're stressed and you're not at your best self to bring your elevator down before actually addressing it, right? So if you can think of it in that way, when you're having those parents with whom you have challenging conversations, understanding that they are coming from a place of love, they're stressed for all the reasons we talked about in the beginning, right? And whatever's going on for them, as I said before with Maddie, I don't know if Maddie was describing what this parent does, but if your solution is putting a kid in their bedroom, you have reasons for doing that, right? Because you're afraid they're going to hurt somebody, because you're afraid you're going to lose your temper and hurt them, because you don't know what else to do, because your head is going to explode if you don't get them out of the situation right now and put them somewhere else, because you're just at the edge, right? That's, or that's feeling helpless. That's fear, right? That's all of those things, right? So whatever is going on with a parent that is not best practices for kids in our minds, can guarantee you that it pretty much always comes from one of those 5 places. And if you, and one of our jobs is to figure out what that is, right? And this emotion coaching stuff can really work wonders when you have challenging caregiver dynamics. So for example, we'll talk about this before, right? So a parent comes to you and criticizes your work. That's kind of the example I just gave with that statement. They blame you for their daughter's poor behavior, and they also happen to slip in that they think you're overpaid, right? Or you know, my membership dues at the synagogue pay your salary. Don't tell me what to do, right? So that may happen. So first, what are the emotions driving that behavior? Well, of those 5, what do you imagine? Anybody? Just call it out because I won't see your hands unless you're one of the 4 people I can see on the screen.
Fear.
Fear of what?
Judgment from you. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. So they're blaming you because they're afraid that if they don't, you'll blame them.
Yeah.
Right. So they're reflexively. It's like you know, when you're a kid and getting bullied all the time, you make fun of yourself so nobody else does. It's the opposite of that. You're lashing out at someone else so they don't lash out against you. Maybe you could be afraid of that. What else might it be?
Maybe shame.
Maybe shame about what?
Well, feeling that you know, kind of projecting on you that they're feeling they're not doing what they should be doing, and instead of taking that responsibility, saying that things are happening because it's your fault, you know, kind of projecting onto you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or maybe shame because
shame that they're not doing a good job as a parent. Yeah. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Someone else.
Maybe shame or embarrassed if their child is doing behaviors that are affecting other parents' children as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the same as that kid on the plane, the baby on the plane, right? Like, the last thing you want is for your kid to be like hurting or mistreating other kids. Nobody wants that, right? Also, no one wants their other kids to be mistreating their own kid, right? So they might be feeling, you know, afraid that if my kid doesn't punch back, they're going to get hurt even worse, right? And so, yeah, great, fight back, you know, like, because if you don't, the world is going to eat you for breakfast, right? I mean, people, you know, and people are worried. That's a fear that people have, right? Is that the right way to approach those conflicts? Maybe not, but it comes from that place generally. Someone else sounded like they're about to say something. No? Okay. So then validate and support. So what are 3 becauses and support that you could offer if somebody says, I think it's your fault that my kid is behaving this way and you're overpaid and you're not doing your job? What are 3 becauses? Again, not agreeing, just validating. I can understand why you might feel that way, because what's one?
I could understand you feel that way because, you know, your daughter's here with me for quite a few hours of the daytime.
Great.
I can understand you feel that way because you feel that I might be overpaid, because obviously you feel that I'm not, you know, doing my job.
You don't see the return on that investment of my salary.
Exactly. And I can understand you feeling that way for the fact that I have a degree in this, and you feel that I'm not doing, you know, taking care of your child's, you know, behavior problem or what the issue is.
Yeah, you think because I've done all this work and you think that I should just be able to handle it, and I'm sitting here today talking to you. You can see that I don't, right? So I can understand why you might feel that way, right? Yeah, it means being vulnerable, right?
I like that. I like validation.
Yeah. And imagine you say that to a parent, you know, from a place of genuine, you know, not like defensive, you know, but like, really, I can get it why you feel that way, because you haven't seen me do these things, because they're here all the time, and so it's natural you might think it's my fault, and because you think I should be better given all you think that I shouldn't have this challenge given how much I'm paid, and given like what you're sending your kid to me. You expect me to be the expert, right, and know how to deal with this. I can understand that, right? That will bring that elevator way down. And then you can go to, how do we, what support? What would be emotional support around that area, or for their child? Anybody? Or for you? So I can understand why you might feel that way, because. So.
But we're here together right now so that we can work together and figure out how we can boost your daughter's behavior in class. So that would be a practical support piece of it. Emotional support before that would be, but we're sitting here together, and I want to figure out how I can do better, and how we can do better, so we can better support you and your child. And
I also want to collaborate with you to figure out what strategies we can put into place, right? Then you're doing the emotional and the practical, right? Great, that's an excellent example. We're gonna move on because we're almost at time here. Here's just another example. This is something you can think about on your own. I don't think that you like me. If someone says to you, I don't think you like me, I don't think you like my child, what are 3 reasons that you might support? I can understand why you might feel that way, because you've only seen me treat them, you haven't seen me treat them with a lot of kindness, because I'm only calling you about the way they're misbehaving, and because you feel like every time you hear from me, it's to hear some more awful news about your kid, right? But I actually do love your kid, and I really deeply want them to do well, and I'm here because I love your kid, and let's work together to figure out what we can do, right? That's the 3 parts, okay? We're not gonna have time for that. We'll have to say that for another time. So we are at 3:30, so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I can stick around for a few more minutes, so I'm in no rush. I understand some of you may need to go. I will, since some of you may be dropping off now, what I will do after this call, later today or tomorrow, is I will send you the slides, and I will send you the websites to the emotional focus school support and family counseling stuff. And I will also send you a link to an evaluation that I would love for you to fill out. It takes really 5 minutes or less. It's just a few questions online. But for those of you that have to go, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your commitment to being a part of this conversation. And for those of you that want to stay for a few minutes and ask any questions, I'm here.
David, I have a question.
Yes, Maddie. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other.
Okay. I know when providing feedback, we talk a lot about like the sandwich method of sharing something like really great that happened or that we observed. I'm wondering in these conversations if it's important to share like a time where you saw them excel or a place where the behavior was really great, and then also share the problematic behaviors, or is it just like, yeah?
I think both, right? Because sharing what you love about the kid or great things that you've seen, right? That's that emotional support piece, right? That and that can lead you more easily into, I think, especially when parents are worried that you don't like their kid, I think it's really helpful. You don't want to do it in like a transparent, obvious way, like, your kid is really great, but if you can really come from a genuine place where like, one thing we really love about having her here is that she's really great at this. And I really value that. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for kind of teaching her how to do that. That's amazing. At the same time, there are some things that are coming up and we could use some help with that, right? And then, but if you're doing the emotional support and the practical support, that can also form the other side of that sandwich, right? But yeah, you want to let the parents know that you actually care about the child and why, right? Because that'll bring the elevator down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Yeah. I got to run. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie.
Yeah. I just want to say that, I love the validation, and it makes perfect sense because it's pretty much kind of what we do with the children too. So, it makes a lot of sense that would be a way to deal with the grown too.
It's a lot harder to do it when you have to validate bad things people are saying about you, right? Yeah. Or about themselves, right? Oh God, I feel like such a terrible parent. I suck. I'm horrible with my child, right? Our instinct is to say, what? If I said to you, God, I'm awful with my kid, I'm a horrible parent, what would you say to me?
You're great.
No, you're good.
You would say you agree?
No, I said you're great.
Oh, you're great. Yeah, no, you're not. You're wonderful. Look, parenting is really hard, right? How much harder is it? You know what? I can understand why you might feel that way because you try stuff and it doesn't work and you lose your temper and that's tough. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to do because we've been so conditioned to be like, no, you're great. Everything's fine. Don't feel bad. And it comes from a really good place, right? Of wanting to reassure someone and make them feel okay, right? But it doesn't do the work of validation, where I can understand why you might feel like a bad parent because you try a lot of things and they don't work, because you feel unqualified and like you're faking it, and because your kid makes you crazy and you feel like you should know how to deal with your own child, right? Mm-hmm. But, right, so it's all of those things. But yeah, that's the initial impulse. No, you're great. What other questions?
Well, I just have I really appreciate these, like the validation and how to deal with it when then the example you gave is the parent is coming at you. What I still feel, and I know we don't have time for it now, but I feel still a loss of is you have a difficult child and you have to approach the parents and figure out what's happening with them, what to approach them, so that flips the dynamic a little. And it's kind of hard because you don't know how the parent's going to react, what's going to happen.
No, and that's why you're nervous as a teacher to do it, right? But like, you have to do it.
Yeah.
And, and I think that what it is having everything that we talked about in the beginning, right? And being really clear on what's going on, with data if possible, so you can really be, clear and specific about what's going on.
Yeah.
And then to ask for help. Here's what's happening. Do you see this at home, right? What can we do? And then all that other emotion coaching piece comes when you're having a challenging conversation, right? When you're in the middle of it, if you're kidding.
Yes. But I mean, again, that's an ideal situation, because a parent sometimes doesn't, they hear this message for the first time.
Yeah.
They're reacting back to you of like, well, no. I mean, like that parent in the parenting clip, in the Parenthood clip.
Totally. And you're like, and that's where we go to the emotion coaching piece, right? Like, I can understand why you think I'm wrong about this, right? I can understand why you're resistant to this, because you don't see it at home, because it's hard to believe that your child might do things like this, and because you love your kid, you know what a great person they are, right? I know that too, right? Your kid is great. I love when they X, Y, and Z, and also there are things that happen that we struggle with, and I would love your advice on it, right? But I mean, does that, we can talk more about it.
I don't know. I'm feeling like we're talking about ideal parents. I mean, there's a reality. The parents are also, people are difficult, and sometimes that's,
Of course they are. Oh yeah, no, people are definitely difficult, I mean, and people behave in difficult ways, but they do it for good reasons, right? And so what I'm talking about is coming to this conversation. No, but it is good reasons for them though, right? Even if you don't agree with them, for them in their lives, it's good reasons, right? And that's the difference, right? For you, it's not a good reason. For me, it might not be a good reason. For them, people don't do things for no reason. People do things for lots of reasons, right? But we can, but yes, I agree. That's at the heart of what can be really difficult about this, right? And those parents who are combative, and those parents who come at you and say you're wrong, those are the toughest ones to talk to. But if you do some of this, emotion coaching bit, and come to it with the understanding for all the stuff that they've been dealing with in their lives, you're more likely to bring them down to the point where they're open. And sometimes, look, at the end of the day, there are sometimes parents, caregivers, who, no matter what you do, they're not going to cooperate. It's not going to work out. They're not going to do what you want them to do. And sometimes that's just, okay, well, I guess we're just going to do what we can at school then, right? And hopefully, using some of these things we've been talking about today, we're talking about the 20% of parents, not 80%, right? when we're doing this kind of work, I should have said, we always think about the 80% of parents that we deal with normally, right? That's who this works for. The 20% of parents, or 15% of parents, who are the extreme versions, right? It's a little more delicate, right? And that's more of a case by case. And certainly, if you are having issues with particular parents or things that you want to talk about, you can call me or email me, and you and I can talk about it. And we don't that's free for you, and I'm happy to problem solve with you.
And I feel like with parents like that too, it's like, even at the very end, if you're totally in disagreement, you're like, okay, well, like, I just want to put it on your radar. Thank you so much. And just even handling it and ending it in a really positive way, though they're usually going to go home and think about it more, and you're going to have them come bring it up to you later, or bring some other part of it later, to where it opens up the dialogue further.
Yeah. I just also wonder, some of there's a dynamic between its difference when it's a supplementary school as opposed to a school. Like, I wonder whether parents deal with those things differently.
They definitely.
One's more real to them.
Yeah, well, one's more real, and one represents a bigger investment of time and energy on their part and on their child's part, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you work in a supplemental school, right? Some parents, I mean, the kitchen is a really lovely community, but some kids probably are there because their parents make them, and the parents may do it because they think that's what you should do, right? And they're not as
actually more at Bechalom than at the kitchen, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. The kitchen is a pretty remarkable community, and that happens to varying degrees at lots of different places. And it's always different whether you're talking about your child's primary place of education in school, where they're spending most of their time, or where they're spending Saturday morning, right? Which at Bechalom and kitchen, it's both Saturdays.
Yeah,
right? So yeah.
And their respect for you as well is different sometimes.
Exactly, because it's and that all factors into all the stuff that we've been talking about, right? Still, you got to be able to work with the parents, and they have to be able to work with you, because you still have this kid for a couple hours every week, and when things don't work, it's hard, right? But yeah, there are definite differences in the way that people will respond, depending on the setting. Absolutely. Any other questions? No?
No, it's great.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Look out for my email later with all the stuff. Thank you for staying a few minutes over.
Awesome.
And hopefully I will talk or see all of you sometime soon.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Bye.